Look, there's no way around it. It's been a rough last year. In fact, that's kind of the reason, probably, that I hadn't been planning to publish that novel. I just kind of written it for fun, and because I was sort of homesick, out constantly around the world organizing and things. But when Mr. Trump got elected, I felt sort of like the last thing the world really needed last year was another dark book of foreboding. Don't worry, I'm hard at work on another one that'll be out soon. But I thought if I was ever going to publish anything funny, last year was the moment for it. It felt to me like we'd taken a kind of dose of reverse Prozac as a nation, and we were just sort of anxious and sad and jittery all the time, and so needed a little bit. Well, but the good news, and sort of what that book and sort of what my work is about, the good news is that this resistance, which has been growing these last years, has begun to really blossom and burgeon, and maybe just in time. And the message I want to bring you tonight is that I think that there are some reasons for at least a kind of guarded optimism if we work hard. Now, I'm going to start with the bad news and just tell you that that guarded optimism doesn't extend precisely to the science of where we are right now. We are in a tough place, and there's no use sugarcoating it. We might as well just talk about it and get it out of the way. I did write the first book about climate change, it'll be 30 years ago next year, and what we didn't, I mean, we knew 30 years ago that we were in trouble. We knew when you burn coal and gas and oil, you put carbon in the atmosphere. We knew its molecular structure trapped heat. We knew things were going to get warmer. We didn't know how fast, and we didn't know how hard it would pinch. And the story of the last 30 years is fast and hard. The damage is much deeper and more traumatic than we would have expected then. You know, we've lost half the summer sea ice in the Arctic. Those pictures that some of us are old enough to remember from the early Apollo missions that showed the Earth for the first time, this beautiful blue-white marble floating in the black void of space, those pictures are as out of date as my high school yearbook photo. The world doesn't look like that anymore, viewed from outer space. Half the ice is gone up top. We see just extraordinary changes in every part of the planet. I was down in the South Pacific 18 months ago with our crew from 350 in the Pacific, who are wonderful, wonderful fighters. I happened to be there at the moment that this kind of wave of warm water sloshed across the Indian and the Pacific Ocean, and in the course of a couple of weeks killed, depending where you were, 50, 80, 100% of the coral reefs surrounding islands that have been there for forever. The Great Barrier Reef is the biggest living structure on Earth, and it's half as living as it was 18 months ago. That's hard. That is a beautiful, one of the most beautiful corners of God's brain, and we are in real time wiping it out, just scraping it away. We saw in the US covers 2% of the planet's surface. So just in the US, just in the last 6 months, think about what we've seen. Hurricane Harvey in Houston drops more rain than has ever been seen in the United States. 54 inches of rain in that rainstorm, 4.5 feet. You can only have a rainstorm like that when you've started to heat up the air and let it hold more water vapor than it could before. The next week, Hurricane Irma has winds above 185 miles an hour, longer than any storm we've ever recorded on this planet. That's because the ocean is warmer and it can support that kind of chaos. The week after that, Hurricane Maria slams in to Puerto Rico, and we see what happens when a Category 5 storm rakes its eye across a developed place for hours at a time. What happens is chaos and destruction. And then what happens in the country that we've built is nobody really helps very much. Half that island still has no electricity 100 and some days later. Think about that. These are Americans. Think about, say, Massachusetts going 100 days without electricity. Think how miserable people's lives would be, and think how angry people would be, and think about what's not happening down there. Barely had we finished with Hurricane Maria, then a fire breaks out in Napa and Sonoma, and 42 people are dead in the course of a night or two. In one of the most affluent and beautiful, Napa, Sonoma, that's one of the places where we kind of define the good life by. It's gorgeous country and beautiful weather and big buckets of wine everywhere, and it's about as good as it gets until people's houses just disappear like that. We thought that was going to be the biggest, worst fire in California in a very long time, until December, when the fire broke out in Santa Barbara and became the largest fire in California history, and it did it in December, 2 months after the point when fire season's supposed to stop in California, except fire season never stops anymore because it is so hot and so dry that it burns all the time. They finally get it extinguished around the first of the year, and 5 or 6 days later we get an epic rainstorm in exactly the same place, and it drops so much rain that we have massive, deadly mudslides that kill 20 people. We're kind of used to seeing big mudslides in poor parts of Peru or Bolivia or Ecuador, but not in Montecito, California, But there is no place now that is immune, and the scary part really is that we're still at the beginning of this experiment. We've raised the temperature of the planet 1 degree so far, and that's been enough to generate the chaos that I have described, but we are on track for much more. Even if we kept every promise that we had made at Paris, everybody had lived up to their pledges, the temperature of the planet would still have gone up, would still go up about 3.5 degrees Celsius, okay? Because those promises were very modest. They were a start, and a good start, but not anywhere near enough. And of course, we're not keeping the promises that we made at Paris. Last summer, our president said that the country that had produced more carbon than any other country on the planet was going to be the one country on the planet that was not going to participate in this process, that we were going to pull out of it. Every other nation on earth, even nations that barely exist, like Syria, have managed to ratify the Paris Climate Accords and at least begin in some haphazard way to live up to them, not us. It's hard to imagine a single more shameful decision that we have ever taken as a people than that. So, what ground for optimism? Well, one ground for optimism is that human ingenuity is always present and always at work and is doing remarkable things. The engineers have done an amazing job in the last decade. We have watched over the last decade as they've managed to bring down the cost of solar energy by 80, 90% in the course of a decade, to the point where it's now the cheapest way to generate power in much of the world, and according to the UN, by 2020 will be the cheapest way every place in the world. It's a kind of magic, and to see that magic up close is to almost weep at its beauty. I was in Africa doing a piece for the New Yorker last spring. I was in Ghana and the Ivory Coast, and then across to East Africa to Tanzania. And in very rural places, in places that don't have power and really will never have power under current arrangements, the places where no one's ever going to bother to build the grid out to. There's a lot of places like that in the world. There are 1 billion people on our planet still without power. That means there are more people This is a kind of odd statistic that you have to think about for a minute. But there are more people without electricity on Earth today than there were when Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, okay? But in the last 18 months, the price of a solar panel has fallen enough that even people in very poor and very rural and very remote places are able to take the 30 cents a day, maybe, that they were spending on kerosene for one lantern in their hut and apply it instead to a solar panel on the roof and an inverter and 3-4 light bulbs and a cell phone charger, maybe a tiny television, a radio. All of a sudden, lives changing very fast. The fact that you can hold up a piece of plate glass and little silicon in it, point it at the sun, and out the back of it flows communication and light and cold, that's a miracle. That's magic on a kind of Hogwarts scale, you know? And we do not appreciate it in quite the ways that we should, because if we did, we would be devoting every single effort that we have as communities, as governments, to taking that magic and spreading it everywhere. We could now, if we wanted to, in relatively short order, shut down the coal and the oil and especially the natural gas that are now filling our atmosphere with carbon and overheating this place, and substitute instead the renewable energy that gives us a chance at going where we need to go. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be simple, but it would be possible. And it would be the kind of challenge to which we should rise. And to which I think we would rise, all else being equal. But all else isn't equal. The question that's always haunted me is why we're moving so slowly, why we're doing comparatively so little. And it took me a long time to figure out what, for me, turned out really in retrospect to be the obvious answer to that. I don't think it's really, though these all play a part, human psychology or that sort of thing. I think the basic problem here is the power of the richest industry in the history of the planet, the fossil fuel industry and its attendant industries, just do not want to change and have been able to use their riches and their political power to keep change from happening. We've learned more and more and more about this story as time has gone on, okay? The most shocking single journalistic discovery of the last 10, 15, 20 years hasn't been any political scandal, though those are all important and interesting. It's been the work that journalists did to help us understand that 30 years ago, the fossil fuel industry and its biggest companies like Exxon knew absolutely everything there was to know about climate change. They had the best scientists in the world working hard on this, and reporters from places like the LA Times and the Columbia Journalism School have documented with breathtaking depth the degree to which those companies knew what was going on. They knew how fast it was going to warm and how much it was going to warm, and they took it very seriously. Companies like Exxon began building their drilling rigs to compensate for the sea level rise that they knew was coming. They began plotting out their strategy for what they were going to bid on the parcels in the Arctic they knew would soon melt. What they didn't do was tell any of the rest of us. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars building the architecture of deceit and denial and disinformation that have kept us locked in a completely ridiculous and phony debate for 25 or 30 years about whether global warming was real. A debate that both sides at the beginning of that debate 30 years ago knew the answer to. It's just that one of them was lying about it, okay? And lying about it so effectively because, as we've learned to our chagrin, the ability to spread disinformation and lies is a particular hallmark of our era. lying about it so effectively that we've now managed to end up with a president who is apparently convinced that climate change was a hoax conceived of by the Chinese, okay? Which is causing unbelievable problems for our planet. We're not going to stop them in Washington, not for the moment, that's not possible. But we can stop them in other ways. We retain real power in this fight. And that's what I want to say today. We need you in this fight right now because we have so many places to aim and so many fights to have. Not in Washington, we can't win there right now. So we're not going to spend all our time trying and worrying about Donald Trump because he's a puzzle and tragedy beyond solving at the moment, okay? We're going to find other things to do. One is this work to make sure that city and town, one after another, are committed to 100% renewable energy, okay? We need engines. We need engines driving the next phase of renewable energy, okay? And so it's good news. I mean, some of this work is already underway. The Sierra Club and others have like 50 cities around America. And they're not just, it's not just, you know, Berkeley and Madison and Northampton that have done it, you know. It's Atlanta and San Diego and Salt Lake City and Pittsburgh. When the president withdrew us from the climate accord, his speech in the Rose Garden, he said, well, I was elected to govern Pittsburgh, not Paris, you know. That afternoon, the mayor of Pittsburgh held a press conference and said, you know what, I was actually elected to govern Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh is going to go 100% renewable energy, okay? So that was a good moment. Sun and wind and water, not natural gas, not the kind of nostrums that they keep trying to sell. The second bucket of work is going to be fighting all that fossil fuel infrastructure everywhere we can. And people are figuring out many ways to do it. Portland, Oregon just passed an ordinance, a municipal law saying there'll be no new fossil fuel infrastructure built in this city ever again. That's important because what the utilities and what the oil companies are trying to do is put in facts on the ground, okay? They know they're near the end of their game, so they want to keep building these pipelines right now, push them through under cover of Trump or Charlie Baker, whoever it is, because once they're in, then they're in for 40 or 50 more years, and the fossil fuel era stretches out into the future, you know, which we can't have. So people are figuring out every way they can to fight them. Even Keystone, I think, as I said, we have some chance. 20,000 people have already promised that they will go to the upper Midwest if TransCanada starts building that pipeline and do what they can to bear witness and get in the way. And that kind of commitment puts some fear into the hearts of people who want to do this kind of work. Third bucket of work, maybe the most important, is to get in the way of the money. We started this divestment campaign, which Concord, among others, has joined in a big way and for which we're very grateful. We started this divestment campaign 5 years ago. Bob Massey, in fact, was a big part of it. He gave us a lot of advice because he'd run so much of the campaign to divest from South African companies 25 years before, okay? And because Desmond Tutu had kind of asked us to take up this new campaign, he said, this tactic worked in South Africa, we need it now because fossil fuel is the human rights violation of our moment. And so we have, and it's been very successful. We're up now to $6 trillion worth of endowments and portfolios that have divested. But the real momentum has come in the last few months. There's this surge now in November. Norway announced that they were divesting from fossil fuels. They have the single biggest pool of investment capital on planet Earth, okay? Their sovereign wealth fund, $1 trillion. And it was particularly significant because they made that $1 trillion drilling for oil in the North Sea, okay? And what they were saying was, we're cashing out of this casino. We understand that this business is dead on its feet. We've watched fossil fuel stocks underperform everything else for the last 5 years. We want out. We're taking our winnings and going to a new casino, okay? The next month, the World Bank said, we're done funding new oil and gas extraction any place on the planet. That was a sharp signal to send to the financial community, but not as sharp as the signal that got sent 10 days ago when New York City, at the absolute epicenter of the financial world, said, we're going to divest too. I got a call two weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, Sunday night, I got a call, and it was, I was just sitting at home in Vermont, minding my own business, and the phone rang, and it was Mayor de Blasio of New York. And there'd been the 350 NYC and 350 Brooklyn, and people have been running great campaigns for years to get them to divest. And he said, you know what, we're going to do it on Wednesday. Not only are we going to divest, we're going to announce that we're suing the 5 biggest oil companies on the planet. Exxon, Chevron, Conoco, BP, Shell. We're going to sue them because we spent $20 billion on Hurricane Sandy, and it was their fault. You know, they were the ones who lied about all this for decades. That's why we're in this fix. Our taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for it. Their shareholders who made a bundle of money from those lies should be the ones who are paying for it. He said, will you come down to New York and join me at this press conference on Wednesday? And I said, okay. And I went down and I stood next to him at the press conference. And when it was my turn to talk, it was fun, you know, for once in my life, doesn't have to like bawl out politicians. Got to say, you did a good thing today, Mr. Mayor. In fact, such a good thing that they should light up the Empire State Building green tonight. They should do it for all the money that you save New Yorkers and all the good that you're doing for the planet. And he nodded happily, and I saw him take a little note, and I was driving back home to Vermont that night, and I stopped for supper and turned on my phone, and someone had texted me a picture of the Empire State Building lit up green. And I was like, 2 days later, the city of Los Angeles city councilors introduced a motion. We'll know in the next couple of weeks if the city of Los Angeles is going to be suing too. I think a lot of people are going to be suing because I think what they're going to figure out is Exxon has a hell of a lot of money, but they don't have an infinite amount of money, okay? And if they have to pay $20 billion to New York and $20 billion to LA and whatever else, there may not be any money left for Boston, you know, when it comes time for it to, so everybody better get on board. What everybody really better get on board with is that divestment stuff, okay? We need the state of Massachusetts to divest its pension fund from fossil fuel. We need it to happen this year. We need it to happen this year. We need all of this stuff to happen this year. I have talked on much too long, so here's where I will end, okay? We need this to happen now. Now, that's what the physics and the chemistry mean. This is different from other social problems, challenges, movements, because it comes with a time limit. If we don't solve it soon, we don't solve it. Dr. King, and my great hero, who we honored last week, Dr. King used to end speeches by saying, and I think he was quoting really from Theodore Parker, the Massachusetts abolitionist, he would say, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. This may take a while, but we're going to win. Okay? It's a very comforting thought, not a thought we get to have when it comes to climate change. The arc of the physical universe is short, and it bends toward heat. And if we do not solve this soon, then we do not solve it. We will not be sitting here having the same discussion we're having tonight 10 or 15 years from now. Either we will have started in some big way to deal with this problem, or it will have passed the point where we can deal with it effectively, and there won't be any use having the discussion that we're having tonight. That's why I spend my time doing what I'm doing. That's why I am so grateful to the people here from 350 and all the different nodes across Massachusetts and all the other people who are engaged in this fight. We need you now more than we've ever needed you, and we don't need you changing your light bulbs and putting up solar panels. Those things are wonderful and important, and my house is covered with them, but that's not how we're going to win this fight now. We are past the point where the math works one person at a time. Instead, we need you deeply politically engaged, making sure that we push the levers of policy that are large enough to make a difference, and that requires building movements big and loud and strong. That's why we set up 350.org, and it's why people set up things like Mothers Out Front, and on and on and on. It's why people are taking all of these things to a new level. I wish that I could promise you that we're going to win this fight. I can't do that. We don't know. We've waited a very long time to get started. The Arctic has mostly melted. That's a bad sign. It's a bad sign when the biggest physical features of your planet are. So we don't know. We know we can't stop global warming altogether. The best science indicates we might be able to keep it from getting entirely out of control, but only if we act with enormous speed and vigor. And that's why I'm so glad that so many of you are in this fight, and I just look forward to being in it with you, shoulder to shoulder. Many, many thanks. Thank you all.